March 15, 1971, RCA Studios, Nashville. Elvis Presley sat in the recording booth, preparing to begin work on what would become his most personally meaningful album. He Touched Me, a collection of gospel songs. This wasn't his first gospel album. He'd recorded His Hand in Mine in 1960 and How Great Thou Art in 1966. But this one felt different, more urgent, more necessary. As the session was about to begin, Colonel Tom Parker pulled Elvis aside for a private conversation that would define not just this album, but Elvis's relationship with his faith. "Elvis, we need to discuss the financial arrangement for this album," Colonel Parker said in his distinctive Dutch accent. "RCA is prepared to offer you your standard royalty rate, 50 cents per album sold. Based on the success of your previous gospel albums, we're looking at potentially significant earnings." Elvis looked at the colonel with an expression that was difficult to read. "How much are we talking about?" "Conservatively? If the album sells as well as How Great Thou Art, we're looking at perhaps $200,000 in royalties over the album's lifetime. Possibly more." Elvis was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that shocked the colonel. "I don't want any royalties from this album." Colonel Parker stared at Elvis. "I'm sorry, what?" "I don't want to make money from gospel music. I want all the royalties, every single penny, donated directly to charity. Churches, missions, organizations that help people. I don't want a cent." "Elvis, that's insane. This is your music. You're performing it. You deserve to be compensated." "Gospel isn't my music," Elvis said firmly. "Gospel is God's music. I'm just the instrument, and you don't charge God for being His instrument. You don't profit from spreading His word." Colonel Parker tried every argument he could think of. Elvis could donate a portion of the royalties, he could take a small percentage and give the rest to charity. He could accept the money and then donate it, getting a tax deduction. But Elvis was immovable. "Colonel, I've made millions of dollars from rock and roll, from movies, from concerts. God gave me the talent that made all that possible. The least I can do is give back when I'm singing for Him. Gospel music saved my life when I was a kid. It gave me hope when we had nothing. It connected me to my mother. It's the most important music I've ever sung. And I cannot, treat it like just another product to sell." The colonel realized he was dealing with something he rarely saw in Elvis, an absolute, non-negotiable principle. Elvis would compromise on many things, movie scripts, concert schedules, business decisions, but not this, not gospel music. "Fine," the colonel said, "but let me at least structure the donations properly. We'll set up a foundation, get the tax benefits, make it official." "No foundation," Elvis said. "No structure, no tax benefits, just direct donations to churches and charities. Anonymous donations. I don't want recognition. I don't want plaques with my name on them. I don't want people knowing the money came from me. This is between me and God." Colonel Parker walked out of the studio shaking his head. In all his years managing Elvis, he'd never understood this side of him, the deeply religious side that saw gospel music as sacred, untouchable by commerce or ego. But the musicians in the studio understood. Many of them had grown up in church, had sung gospel before they'd ever played rock and roll. They knew that for Elvis, gospel wasn't entertainment, it was worship. The He Touched Me sessions were different from any other recording Elvis had done. There was no tension, no frustration, no sense of obligation. Elvis was relaxed, joyful, completely present. When he sang Amazing Grace, tears streamed down his face. When he sang I've Got Confidence, he smiled with genuine happiness. The backing vocalists, the Imperials, a professional gospel quartet, later said those sessions were the most spiritual experiences of their careers. "It wasn't a recording session," one of them recalled. "It was a worship service. Elvis wasn't performing for microphones. He was singing for God." During a break in recording, Elvis gathered the musicians and singers. "I want you all to know something. I'm not taking any money from this album. All the royalties are going to charity. And I want you to know why. Gospel music is sacred. It's not about me being Elvis Presley. It's about being a voice for something bigger and more important than any of us. If I profited from this music, I'd be using God to make money. And that's backwards. We should be using money, or in this case, giving up money, to serve God. The room was silent. Then someone started singing, "How Great Thou Art," and everyone joined in. They sang without microphones, without recording equipment running, just voices raised together in the studio. Elvis sang louder than anyone, his voice filled with a passion and purity that rarely came through in his rock and roll performances. "He Touched Me" was released in April 1972. Despite Elvis's insistence on anonymity regarding the charitable donations, word leaked out, as it always does, that Elvis wasn't taking any royalties from the album. The story spread among gospel music circles, then to the mainstream press. Reporters asked Elvis about it. "Is it true you're giving away all your earnings from your gospel album?" "I'm not giving anything away," Elvis would answer. "I'm just not taking what was never mine to begin with. This album is my offering. You don't keep offerings for yourself." The album was a commercial success, reaching number 2 on the Billboard country charts and number 79 on the pop charts. More importantly, it won the Grammy Award for Best Inspirational Performance, Elvis's second Grammy, and like his first, for a gospel album, not for any of his rock and roll hits. When Elvis received the Grammy, he did something that shocked the audience at the award ceremony. He walked to the microphone with the trophy and said, "This award belongs to God, not to me. I'm donating this Grammy to the Memphis Union Mission, where they help homeless people and feed hungry families. Because that's what this music is about, helping people, not collecting trophies." Elvis walked off the stage and directly to the director of the Memphis Union Mission, who was sitting in the audience as Elvis's guest. He handed over the Grammy, embraced the surprised director, and returned to his seat. The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted over 3 minutes. The royalties from "He Touched Me" were distributed to dozens of churches and charities across the American South. Small rural churches received anonymous donations that allowed them to repair roofs, buy new hymnals, support missionary work. Inner city missions received funds for food programs and homeless shelters. Religious schools received money for scholarships. None of the donations identified Elvis as the source. The checks came from RCA Records with simple notes: "Donation from gospel album royalties." Most recipients never knew Elvis Presley had funded their programs, but occasionally someone would figure it out. A pastor in Mississippi received a significant donation and called RCA to ask about the source. When he learned it came from Elvis's gospel album royalties, he called Graceland to thank Elvis personally. "Mr. Presley, I just want to thank you for your generosity. Your donation is allowing us to—" Elvis interrupted him gently. "Pastor, I appreciate the call, but please don't thank me. I didn't give that money. God gave it to you through the album. I was just the delivery system. Thank Him, not me." "But you made the music that generated those funds. God gave me the voice and the opportunity. I'm just returning what was always His in the first place." "He Touched Me" wasn't the only gospel album Elvis recorded without taking royalties. Every gospel project he worked on for the rest of his life followed the same principle. When he recorded gospel songs for other albums, he insisted those tracks specifically generate donations rather than personal income. His accountants tried to explain the financial implications. "Elvis, you're leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table over your career. If you just took the money and donated it yourself, you'd get substantial tax deductions that would actually save you money overall." But Elvis was unmoved by financial logic. It's not about tax strategy. It's about not profiting from God's music. If I take the money and then donate it, I'm still treating it as my money to give away. It was never my money. It's His from the beginning to the end. This principle extended beyond album royalties. When Elvis performed gospel music in concerts, he refused to accept payment for those portions of his shows. His concert contracts included specific clauses stating that gospel performances were offered freely as worship and should not be included in compensation calculations. Promoters thought this was insane. Elvis, you're literally working for free during part of your own concerts. No, Elvis would correct them. I'm not working during gospel songs. I'm worshiping, and worship isn't work. In June 1977, just 2 months before his death, Elvis recorded what would be his final gospel session. He was in poor health, struggling with prescription drug addiction, barely able to perform. But when he entered the studio to record gospel songs, something shifted. His voice, weak and strained during rock and roll sessions, became clear and powerful when singing "He Is My Everything." The engineers were amazed. How is he doing this? He could barely sing yesterday. One of the background singers offered an explanation. Because yesterday he was performing for people. Today he's singing for God. There's a difference. Elvis recorded 3 gospel songs that day. When the session ended, he asked his accountant, "The royalties from these songs, make sure they go to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, all of it, every penny." "Of course, Elvis, same as always. And make sure Danny Thomas knows these are for the kids, not from Elvis Presley, from someone who understands that children deserve God's healing more than I deserve God's money." Those were the last gospel songs Elvis Presley ever recorded. 2 months later, he was dead. After Elvis's death, accountants calculated that over his career, Elvis had given away approximately $500,000 in gospel music royalties, equivalent to several $1,000,000 in today's money. The money had helped hundreds of churches, fed thousands of hungry people, provided shelter for countless homeless individuals, funded missionary work around the world. And almost none of the recipients ever knew the money came from Elvis Presley. Vernon Presley, sorting through his son's financial records after his death, found a handwritten note Elvis had placed in his gospel album file. "This music is my tithe to God. Everything I have came from Him. Everything I am came from Him. Gospel is how I say thank you. You don't charge God for saying thank you." Priscilla Presley, reflecting on Elvis's relationship with gospel music years later, said, "People know Elvis as the king of rock and roll. But if you asked Elvis what he was most proud of, he would have said his gospel music. Not because it was commercially successful, though it was, but because it was the most honest, most authentic thing he ever did. It was the only music where he felt completely free to be himself, because he wasn't trying to be Elvis Presley. He was trying to be a voice for God." The Grammy Awards Elvis won were both for gospel music. His rock and roll, which changed music history, never won him a Grammy. But his gospel, the music he refused to profit from, was the music the industry honored. Elvis understood something profound about the relationship between art, faith, and commerce. He knew that some things were too sacred to commodify, too important to reduce to profit margins and royalty statements. Gospel music was his connection to his childhood, to his mother, to his faith. It was the one part of his musical life that remained pure, uncorrupted by the machinery of fame and fortune. And he protected that purity by refusing to let money touch it. The gospel album Elvis made for free, and all the gospel music he recorded without taking royalties, represents something rare in the entertainment industry: principle over profit. Elvis had every legal and moral right to profit from his gospel recordings. He was the performer. He was the talent. He was the draw. But Elvis understood that legal rights and moral rights aren't always the same thing. He had the legal right to profit from gospel music, but he believed he had a moral obligation not to. "You don't charge God" wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was Elvis's theology condensed into 5 words. God had given him his voice, his opportunities, his success. Everything Elvis had, wealth, fame, influence, came ultimately from the talents God had given him. So when Elvis used those talents to sing God's music, he saw it as returning what had always belonged to God in the first place. The money from gospel album sales wasn't Elvis's to keep. It was God's to use for God's purposes. Elvis was just the steward, the delivery system, the instrument. And instruments don't keep payment meant for the craftsman. This principle made no sense to Colonel Parker, to accountants, to business managers. It was financially irrational. But it made perfect sense to Elvis because it wasn't about finances. It was about faith. The gospel album Elvis made for free, and all the gospel music he recorded without accepting royalties, stands as testament to the fact that not everything in Elvis's life was about being Elvis Presley. Some things, the most important things, were about being Aaron, the middle name given to him by his mother Gladys, who had raised him to understand that faith wasn't something you performed. It was something you lived. And for Elvis, living his faith meant singing gospel music not for money, not for fame, not for awards, but simply because some music is too sacred to sell. You offer it freely, as worship, as gratitude, as recognition that everything you have, including your voice and your talent, was never really yours to begin with. You don't charge God. You just sing.